Come check this, guys. Healing Web Part 1, starting in the upper left-hand corner. We're going to begin our search by focusing on these names, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and Rockefeller. In the 1930s, they effectively bought up all the universities and the medical industry. They controlled the WHO, the Red Cross, the USDA, the EPA, and the FDA. All these different government agencies are designed to keep us unhealthy. They're not designed to keep us healthy. Let's go over to Planned Parenthood. Right? Eugenics, Julian Huxley, and Planned Parenthood. What do they all have in common, guys? Look into the founder of this organization. Okay? Sterilization? Why? Caduceus, the staff of Hermes. This is the medical symbol, right? You see this in hospitals. He is the god of trade, trickery, and thieves. The Department of Defense. Why are they in charge of the CDC and the National Institute of Health? And what is Agenda 21? Things that make you go, Research, guys. Research.
I don't want to sound like a fatalist, because I'm not. I'm absolutely convinced that ultimately the principles of freedom shall prevail. I know that that will happen. I may not live to see it. I won't live to see it. But truth cannot be extinguished. And our great society promotes the discovery of truth, not the suppression of it. And those of you who are involved in the climate change issue know that it is the goal of the international community, those who believe in the Rousseau socialist philosophy of governance. It is their chief objective to suppress truth in order for the propaganda to prevail that supports their power.
As you said, that strap in, like tighten your seatbelt. You're going to be crazy.
In a document called The First Global Revolution, authored by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, on pages 104 and 105, it stated, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers, of course, will be caused by human intervention that will require a global response." That's the origin of global warming, ladies and gentlemen.
Some people involved may actually have a pure heart and believe in it the way you do. Most do not. Those who want more government controls are never going to come out and say it. They've got to trick you into it. But the more you follow the usual suspects, the more you'll recognize their hallmarks, and the more you can ring the bell and protect your own community.
There should be a better coordination between the United Nations Central Organization and things like the UNDP and its organs and the World Bank and the IMF, which had drifted way apart from the original intention, which was to work in coordination with the United Nations rather than be totally independent, rather arrogant, looking down the nose at what these people did up in New York while we ran the world essentially through our big money pockets. I just hope that in 5 to 10 years' time we will be at the bottom end of a political leadership trough at the moment. I'm hoping it will come up and we will get political leadership. But we need international structures of far greater power and authority and respect.
That I have a pretty straightforward answer. It depends on whether Donald Trump is re-elected as US president next year or not.
In a document called The First Global Revolution, authored by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, on pages 104 and 105, it stated, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers, of course, will be caused by human intervention that will require a global response." That's the origin of global warming, ladies and gentlemen.
Peter, what are we seeing on this wall?
Well, you're seeing the history of much of the last 60 years in terms of technology and ideas that have had a huge impact in the world. Jay Forrester passed away last fall, and about 3 weeks ago we had a celebration here of his life. So this goes from the 1930s, in his early, life, 40s. He was actually, if anybody could be called the inventor of the modern digital computer, Jay would be it. He led the team at MIT that built the first general-purpose digital computer. That's the stuff you see over here. How IBM got involved. IBM was their contractor. That's how IBM got into computation, into digital computers.
It's not some science fantasy effect from 2001. This electronic display emanating from Australia's largest computer is a picture of the condition, past, present and future of planet Earth. The program was originally devised by a scientist working from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Jay Forrester. It was developed under the auspices of the Club of Rome by an MIT research team to present a complex model of the world and what we humans are doing to it. The program, called World One, doesn't pretend to be a precise forecast. What it does for the first time in man's history on the planet is to look at the world as one system. It shows that Earth cannot sustain present population and industrial growth for much more than a few decades. It shows that simply cleaning up our car exhausts and making some small effort to limit our families simply isn't enough. It's like an electronic guided tour of our global behaviour since 1900 and where that behaviour will lead us. Well, this is the printed version of what we've just seen on the television screen. What looks at first to be just a maze of computer characteristics is really a system of very simple graphs which project what's going to happen to the planet over the next 150 years if we don't do something drastic to stop it. Down the left-hand side of the graph is the date, 1900, 1940, 1980, 2020, right down to 2060. Now, each of these lines of letters represents a curve showing some aspect of the condition of the planet. The further out this way they go, the greater that figure is. The further this way, the less. For example, P represents population. So here it is at 1900. And then it comes up to 1940, it starts to take off. Here we are at 1980, up to the turn of the century, and then it starts to peter off. Let's now have a look at this next curve, the Q curve, which is the quality of life. And this is represented by, for example, the amount of space people have, the amount of money they have to spend, the amount of food they have to eat. Now, it increases rapidly up to 1940, but from 1940 on, the quality of life diminishes. And here we are about the turn of the century, and we come up to the year 2020, and it's really come right back. More people, of course, means that you start to chew up your supply of natural resources. And this is this curve here, the N curve, that shows that slowly but steadily the pool of natural wealth in the world, natural resources, minerals, oil and so on, is slowly but steadily diminishing. So this is the situation. As population increases, the quality of life decreases and the supply of natural resources decreases. But have a look at this curve here. This is called the Z curve, and it represents pollution. Now, predictably enough, as the population increases up to 1980, pollution increases. There's more rubbish. But from 1980 to the year 2020, pollution really takes off. This is assuming, of course, that we don't do anything about it. So the year 2020, the condition of the planet starts to become highly critical. And if we don't do anything about it, this is what's going to happen. The quality of life is going to go right back to practically zero. Pollution is going to become so serious, right out here, that it will start to kill people. So the population will diminish. Right back here, less than it was in the year 1900. And at this stage, around about the year 2040, 2050, civilized life as we know it on this planet will cease to exist. Well, hopefully, of course, it won't be allowed to happen. But it's taken this kind of shock treatment to nudge governments into doing something.
So one of the kind of milestones captured in Kelvey's wall here is a book called World Dynamics, which led to another book, the popularized version, called The Limits to Growth. It was the first complete model of the global industrialization process, how economic growth interacts with all the environmental and social constraints. So today, virtually all the issues we talk about in the general heading of sustainability were foreshadowed.
I came back to MIT, walked into the office on Monday, and it was announced that a group I never heard about before, the Club of Rome, would be coming to MIT to learn about our computer modeling methods because they were interested in doing some kind of global study.
In 1972, Dennis Meadows was the first to be assigned with such future studies, financed by Volkswagen Foundation.
Then I put together a team of 16 people, and we worked for almost 2 years and produced the work. Limits to Growth was not the goal of the project. The goal was a very big scientific report, and Limits was written as an afterthought. What we said is that exponential growth will take us to the limits very soon. Actually, if you look at our book, our 1972 book, although we showed many different scenarios, all of them show that growth stops sometime in the period of 2020 to, let's say, 2060. So soon.
This little sketch here is the first world dynamics model that Jay sketched out sitting in an airplane seat flying back from Germany, where the Volkswagen Foundation had hosted the first gathering of what became the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome, which still exists, was the sponsor of the Limits to Growth project. Jay sketched out the model, the system dynamics model, the airplane flight back, and about 2 or 3 months later he had a simulated model, and about 2 or 3 months after that, a book. That was kind of midway in Jay's career, and the right half of this really chases out the second half, the last 40 years. Jay lived to be 98 years old, where a lot of us got involved. So a lot of the sustainability issues, the seeds were planted back here with the Limits to Growth. But then on the right side of the wall, you see the work on climate change. You see the work on education. We'll talk maybe a little later about the Global Sustainable Food Laboratory. This whole unfolding that kind of occurred as a consequence of the kind of seeds Jay had planted. It's quite remarkable.
The Club of Rome has been described as a crisis think tank, which specialises in crisis creation. The main purpose of this think tank was to formulate a crisis that would unite the world and condition us to the idea of global solutions to local problems.
You know, again, it's easy to criticize, but if you think we're trying to invent something that's never existed, which is, you might say, a commons-based, socially oriented and sensitive governance structures that can function globally as well as locally, and how to create a new harmonious ecosystem between the local and the global.
You disturb the system over the threshold of the so-called tipping points. At the end of the century, we will have about 2 billion people living on Earth.
Food production is, of course, what we're really going to suffer from.
Rather than 9 billion, which is the usual number used in demographics around the world. We will lose soil, erosion, desertification, and we won't have the phosphate to feed 9 billion people. So it will be far less. Far less.
More than 11,000 scientists signed a petition calling for population control as a means of combating climate change. In an article published Tuesday in the journal Bioscience, the scientists wrote that planet Earth is, quote, facing a climate emergency. They argued that population control was a necessary response to this emergency, writing, quote, the world population must be stabilized and ideally gradually reduced. This ideology is dangerous because it suggests that reducing the human population is the best solution to our problems. But the petition presents no facts or data to support its claim that the human population is the cause of shrinking ice caps, rising ocean levels, and an increase in the average global surface temperature. And it doesn't show any data to prove that reducing human population could help the planet. That's just bad science. And who gets to decide which populations are controlled? The UN? Individual countries? Global intellectual elites? Elite?
But refusers. We'll just get rid of all the whites in the United States.
Stormy, quickly, calm before the storm.